This has to be one of the friendliest churches that certainly I have ever seen, and probably in the world. Debbie and I have been here slightly less than 2 months, and in that time we've been welcomed warmly by so many of you. We've met so many of you, not everybody, but so many of you. And we visited here 1st of June, close to mid-June. Had never been to the state of Idaho before, certainly had never been to Boise, and until 2 weeks ago had never been to the state of Oregon. Now we've been there, so now we've been everywhere. But on our first visit here on Sunday, we were warmly welcomed and invited by Stacy, there she is, to Idaho Pizza after church, and that pretty well sold this right there. And so, but I want to say we're truly blessed to have you here and to be here with you. And I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity today to talk to you about some things that I think are very important. And the congregation is truly blessed to have those step up in the absence of Kevin and assume what he did on Sunday morning, which you discover after you're done is no easy task, but to do it very effectively. Debbie and I moved here from Dallas. We lived in Dallas for 5 years, but Missouri was always home. We lived there for 30 years after we got married out of Abilene Christian. We moved up to Missouri. I grew up in Ohio. She grew up in Texas. We moved to Missouri and made everybody mad. We had no relatives in Missouri. We had no relatives in any state that touched Missouri. But that's where we settled, and we lived there for 40 years. Debbie taught school, taught reading. I practiced law for 35 years. And I will tell you that it's very nice to stand up before a group who I think at least accepts you, if not likes you, unlike standing before 3 surly appellate court judges who really would like nothing more than to reduce you to a quivering mass. Or to go into the courtroom and have someone stand up and object every time you think you've made just a tremendous point. You may object today, but probably your kind nature will keep you from standing up and doing so. But if you do, we will address that, and it won't be the first time by any means that has occurred. There's a story that there was a patient who was dying, knew he was dying, and he said, sort of comically, well, at the time of my death, I would like to have on one side a lawyer, and on one side an accountant, so that I can recreate what Jesus felt when he died. Sometimes that's true. But today, we want to talk about what I'm going to call our friend, our friendly thief on the cross. There were two. You recall, it was just read. There were two thieves that were crucified with Jesus, one on one side, one on the other. And in the beginning, according to Matthew and to Mark, both thieves cursed Jesus. They had a demeanor and a disposition about them that was very, very different from the man who was hung in between them. I want to reread the last portion of the section that was read just a moment ago, beginning in verse 39 of Luke 23. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence. We are punished justly, for we're getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answered him, I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise. We need to understand the scene from which these words come. We have a cross here. In fact, that came up. I hadn't gone up to see it much. I wondered if it was wooden. No, but it looks pretty wooden. And indeed, it would do the job if we wanted to do. what was done to Jesus. There were 3 of them hung, stuck in the ground there on Calvary. There's one in the middle where Jesus was. There was one on the right of him where there was a thief. And there was one on the left of him where there was a thief. And all 3 were condemned to die. The cross was something that was the worst death that one could die. If you hung on the cross, then you were the worst sort of criminal, or you were a slave. Because it was an agonizing death, but more importantly, it was a death that signified how worthless you were. If you died on the cross, you were despicable. You were worth absolutely nothing. You weren't even worth the nails that they took to hang you up there. But the Son of God and 2 thieves were hung in that cross. Now we use that as sort of an inspiration, and indeed it is. It's our way to heaven because of what occurred on the cross. But imagine, to set this scene, there's somebody there. There's somebody there today. And not only that, there's somebody here, and there's somebody here. We have 3 up there. And we have 3 people who will be in the throes of death soon. And they are hated by the crowd. The crowd. A crowd. It's not very often that someone is put to death in this country, executed. It does occur. But we really wouldn't know about it if it weren't reported in the media. We really wouldn't. I doubt if anybody's ever been to an execution sanctioned by the government. Probably not. Yet, in Jerusalem that day, it was sport. Probably thousands of people were gathered around out here where these 3 people hung to die. And they came to see it, and it probably wasn't their first one. You know, you could go along the countryside in certain areas and see where the Romans had crucified people. Those they thought would not be friendly to the state. Those they thought might oppose Caesar. Those they just didn't like. The Romans could crucify people, and did. Some would come to see it as sport. Some would come to see it because it's their family member. Some would come to see it because they had been victimized. Some were just passing by. And we really can't grasp what's going on because, you know, in this country we have something called the 8th Amendment, which is to free people from cruel and unusual punishment. Let me tell you, this is nowhere close to what the 8th Amendment allows. We sometimes argue over whether or not the right drug should be, a certain drug should be injected in somebody because the death might take too long or be painful or whatever. We will argue over that. Whether we should argue about it or not, I'll leave that to you. But they certainly did not argue over whether or not somebody should be hung on the cross and essentially suffocated over a period of hours or days. That's the scene. That's what we've got. 3 of these hideous crosses before us with 3 different men on it. The one in the middle is not saying anything. He's not engaging in conversation with anybody. He's just there. And he hasn't engaged. He hasn't argued with anybody. He hasn't protested his innocence. He hasn't really done much of anything. He's just been a lamb to slaughter. But the 2 guys on the right, they're a different story. From the beginning, according to the other Gospels, both of them cursed the crowd. I don't belong up here. I didn't do it. This isn't fair. You don't know how I grew up. You don't know what I've endured. You don't know what I need. This isn't fair. This isn't right. Take me down. Get away from me. Cursing the whole time. Very much in contrast to the man in the middle. And the crowd still standing out here watching it, yelling back at them, oh, yes, you do. Yes, you do. All three of you do. They would revile the ones on either side and say, you're a thief, you're a robber, you're a crook, you're a criminal, you're no good. And to you in the middle, you say you're the king of the Jews. You think you can perform all these miracles? You think you're really hot stuff? Then bring yourself down. Save yourself. You supposedly healed all these other people. Why can't you save yourself? If you're who you say you are. And the guys on the right said, yeah, how about that? If you're who they say you are, and you're not denying it, then save yourself and save us too. It's a scene of chaos that's going on around here with these three on the cross who very shortly will be dead. These men had been forsaken by God. That's the view of the crowd. If you were crucified, you were nothing. Nobody liked you. You were stripped of your clothes, of your possessions, of your humanity, of your dignity. You were nothing. You were forsaken. You were lost. You were dirt in front of everybody, even God. But there was one. One of the thieves, we'll say he's over here. In the midst of all of his pain, of his agony, of his impending death, he said, something's going on here. In the beginning, I was reviling this man in the middle. But I'm starting to see that he may know more what's going on than there's thousands of people out here that are screaming and yelling and mocking us and throwing rocks and doing whatever they're doing. He begins to change. He says, this thief, who is changing, 39 words that are recorded. He makes 6 confessions about Jesus. At some point during this time that they're hung on the cross, this thief looks to Jesus and says these words that we've read. And the 6 confessions that he makes are these. 1, God will hold me accountable. It occurs to him. He's guilty. He knows he's guilty. But he says there's somebody in the middle who's not reacting like us. And maybe he is God. Maybe he is. He is not like me. God will hold me accountable. For the first time, probably, in his life, he no longer makes excuses. He does not challenge who Jesus is. He does not accuse God of being unjust, unfair, unkind, uninvolved, indifferent. He is emptying himself in the way that he can by saying, God will hold me accountable. Not just for my thievery, but for not being a perfect person before I got up on this cross. He makes that statement to Jesus. He says also, there is life beyond the grave. And this guy in the middle, Jesus, has something to do with it. Everything that you see, probably that day. You know, Jesus was tried 6 times before they put him on the cross. And these guys would have been enduring something during this time too, and would have known probably that there were 3 of them that were going to be up there. They would have seen what was happening, what was going on. And this guy's being treated differently from us. The Jews are awfully interested in having him killed for some reason. But nobody can say what he's done. And they keep calling him a king, but never on the cross did Jesus say he was a king. Never. He's not making those decisions. He's not fighting this. He's taking it all. And so the thief says, there's life beyond the grave, and this guy, Jesus, has something to do with it. And then it occurs to him again. He says, number 3, I am sinful. We are getting what we deserve and are receiving. But he is not. He is different from me. I am a sinner. If something bad happens to me, all right, I'm a sinner. I deserve it. I don't have the right to be treated perfectly because I have mistreated people as well. But it occurs to him, number 4, that Jesus is sinless and has done nothing wrong. Nothing to deserve this. He's seen it that day. Jesus is not fighting what's going on. The crowd is making fun of him and mocking him and throwing stones and doing whatever they're doing. And the 2 thieves up here started out saying, hey, it's not my fault. Get me down. This isn't fair. All the things they said. But Jesus is not. And he says, number 5, Jesus is the king. Claim Jesus didn't make, but the crowd's been making, and a sign above Jesus' head says that. He says, Jesus is the king. Now think about this again. This is entirely inconsistent with the setting. A week earlier, Jesus had come into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and they said, Hosanna, and he made an entrance like a king would enter. But not now. Not today. Today is a day of death. In the midst of crucifixion, of blood, of utter and total defeat. Our thief turns and says, he is the king. He is the one. He is it. I don't understand it all, but there's something different going on with this man. And so his final statement to Jesus is, remember me when you come into your kingdom. What a transformation for the thief who had mocked Jesus to say, now remember me when you come into your kingdom. Make room for me in your kingdom. He had no clue how or when that would happen. He didn't know. He just knew that in this moment, he could either face the crowd with all of its chaos and all of its confusion and all of its sinfulness and its hatred and its mockery and revilement, or he could turn to the side and say, you haven't done anything wrong. You're not protesting what's going on. You're not mocking anybody. They say you're a king. You very well might be. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Instead of looking this way, he now looks upon the face or body of Jesus as he can and makes these confessions. Jesus finally speaks. This is the only discourse he has on the cross. He'll address John later, but there's no back and forth. This is the only discourse. The man says something to Jesus. Jesus responds. He's been silent on the cross, except for spontaneous statements. You recall the last statement he made? We read a moment ago. Father, forgive them. Nobody said that on the cross. And that may have been the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back for our thief. Nobody forgives from the cross. But Jesus did. And so now Jesus responds when the thief says, remember me. He said, today you will be with me in paradise. Whoa. Thief didn't ask for that. He said, remember me whenever this happens, however it happens, however you do this. Remember me. At least I am going to acknowledge you. Nobody else is, but I will. And Jesus says, today, the sun is still shining, but the sun will be gone soon. But before the sun goes down, you will be with me in paradise. For Paul, paradise was the third heaven. He mentioned this in 2 Corinthians. He said, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up into the third heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. God knows. And I know this man. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I don't know. God knows, was caught up to paradise. He heard inexpressible things, things that man is not permitted to tell. They're going to go from hanging on that cross in agony, not able to breathe, hurt, his legs ultimately broken, to hearing inexpressible things of God. It is the other end of the universe. There is a contrast that's presented in the crucifixion that we cannot imagine. From the worst type of death to the presence of God, this sinner, the thief, was going. The contrast is made too between Adam and this thief. Adam was the thief who lost the Garden of Eden, ate from the tree. Jesus was taking this thief with him to paradise in Revelation, according to Revelation. He was returning to the garden. That's the paradise of God. Adam had lost it. This thief was returning with Jesus. But important to note is the only reason he was going to paradise was because he was with Jesus. Nothing to do with himself. Nothing with what he had done himself. But his turning to Jesus, acknowledging his sinfulness, acknowledging his nothingness, and saying, Jesus, remember me when you come to your kingdom. So, what does all this mean? We are the thief. We are the thief. The thief did nothing to deserve paradise. He made no statement that Jesus was the Son of God. That's not recorded. He did not follow any particular pattern to get his salvation. He wasn't baptized. Some say the thief is the exception because of that. I will submit that he is the norm, that he is us. But important to note is the crucifixion passages are not about baptism. That's not the point. The point is the Son of God is dying on the cross. And there are two others with him, and one does not acknowledge him, and the other one empties himself and dies. These passages are about a sinner's emptiness and recognition of a bloody king who could save. That's what this is about. The thief could do and did absolutely nothing for paradise. Jesus took him there after the thief made the confessions that he made. And his change from reviling Jesus and hurling insults back at the crowd to turning away from the crowd and turning toward the Son of God, to Jesus. He is like us. If we continue to face the crowd, to engage with the crowd, to be the crowd, to be a part of the chaos, to be a part of the sinfulness, to be a part of the confusion, to be like everyone else. We are like the thief who did not change. But what the thief on this side did was say, the crowd does not have the answer. This is not the way. Sometimes I feel good, sometimes I don't feel good. But notwithstanding all of that, this is not the way. This is the way. And he turned and he faced Jesus and he said, I am a sinner. I wasn't going to do it, but Max, there we are. You didn't do it today, and I was disappointed. I've heard it twice. I don't know if he's done this for years or not. But he came up here the first time and he said, my name is Max. I'm a sinner. I'm saved by grace. I said, that's it. That is it. Whether you say it or you don't say it. That's what the thief did. He turned to Jesus and he said, I am a thief. I am a sinner. Remember me. That's all he could do. That's all we can do. Now, God does not save us. He is not compelled to save us because of what we do. We actually have nothing more to offer than the thief. Baptism is a rich event sanctioned by Jesus to proclaim our new birth. But baptism is not the sacrifice. We can't undergo that and suddenly say, we are good. We are all right. What must occur as well, and first, is our turning our face to Jesus and saying, you are the one. You are the one that will get me out of this mess. Not going through a particular formula. Not saying a certain word. Not saying a certain phrase. Not doing this or that or something else. The thief could do nothing. Now, I believe, had the thief survived, he would have ignored the noise of the crowd. He would have kept his face, his eyes on Jesus. He would have proclaimed Jesus. Do you notice how Jesus converted the thief? He didn't say a thing. He didn't say a thing. He didn't set out to convert the thief. But he stood, he hung up there and did not take the insults back, give the insults back. He did not proclaim his innocence. He took what the crowd, the people gave him, and he forgave them. And that made an impression on our thief. And even by doing that, by loving other people who don't love us, we minister. You don't have to say a word. How different is it? Boy, how humbling is it when you come at someone and they don't say anything back and they forgive you for that. Me and my big mouth. That's what Jesus did. That is ministering. You wonder how you can minister sometimes? Minister like Jesus did on the cross. Love in the midst of hate and forgive. That has to come first before we go into the water. We have to be ready to die to ourselves to where we can love other people. And if we do that, then we are able to accept the Lordship of Jesus. But not until we're ready to let those things go inside of us. There's the story of a soldier who was in a foxhole, scared to death. Another soldier jumped in on top of him. He looked up and he said, it's a chaplain. He said, okay. He said, he pulled out his crucifix that he was wearing, the first soldier in. And he looked up at the chaplain and he said, sir, how do you work this thing? Jesus is not something to be worked. He is someone to face, honor, worship, obey. And as we empty ourselves and die to ourselves and decide to live forgivingly like he did, beginning with his message on the cross, we begin to take on his characteristics. As we turn from the crowd, from its distractions, and face and address Jesus, and ask him to remember me.